All right, let's get right into it. Picture this, May 27th, 1905. In the narrow strait between Korea and Japan, two massive fleets of steel battleships are about to collide. And this isn't just any battle. This clash is going to decide a war, for sure, but it's also going to send shockwaves through every single navy on the planet. This is the story of the Battle of Tsushima, a fight so brutal, so lopsided, it completely rewrote the rules of naval combat forever. And look, to get a sense of just how huge this was, you don't have to take my word for it. One of Britain's top military thinkers at the time, a guy named Sir George Clark, said it was by far the greatest and the most important naval event since Trafalgar. I mean, think about that. He's putting Tsushima on the same level as Admiral Nelson's legendary victory 100 years earlier. The whole world was watching, and they had no idea what they were about to witness. Because the results, well, they were just jaw-droppingly one-sided. Take a look. The Russian fleet lost all 11 of its battleships, every single one. The Japanese? They lost 0. The Russians had over 5,000 sailors killed and another 6,000 captured. For Japan, the number of killed was just 117. This wasn't a battle. It was a complete and total annihilation. Which brings us to the big question, the one we're going to unpack here. How? How on earth could the navy of a major European empire be so utterly dismantled by Japan, a nation that, honestly, had only just stepped onto the world stage? Well, the answer isn't simple. It's a wild story of a doomed voyage, game-changing technology, and absolutely brilliant tactics.
You see, Russia's defeat really begins long before a single shot was fired. It starts with one of the most insane naval deployments in all of history, an 18,000-mile gamble to sail an entire fleet from the Baltic Sea all the way around the world to the Pacific. Just look at this timeline. It shows you the unbelievable scale of this trip. They leave Europe in October of 1904, kicking off 7 agonizing months at sea. They're steaming across the entire globe. But here's the kicker. While they're halfway there in Madagascar, they get the news that Port Arthur, the very place they were sent to save, has already fallen to the Japanese. Their mission is gone, but they're ordered to press on, with this vague new plan of just trying to make it to the Russian port of Vladivostok. And this whole journey was just a cascade of disasters. Right at the start, in a state of complete paranoia, they actually fired on British fishing boats in the North Sea, killing fishermen and almost starting a war with Great Britain. Then came the logistical nightmare. They couldn't get coal. Neutral ports, pressured by Britain, kept turning them away. And all that time in the water meant their ship hulls were covered in marine growth, which sounds minor, but it's like trying to run a race while dragging an anchor. It cut their speed dramatically. You can just imagine, morale was at absolute rock bottom. So, let's be clear. By the time the Russian fleet finally limped into the Tsushima Strait, they weren't a battle-ready force. Not even close. They were exhausted. Their ships were slow and inefficient, and their crews were completely demoralized. They were sailing straight into a fight that, in so many ways, they had already lost.
But on the other side of that strait, a very, very different fleet was waiting. The Imperial Japanese Navy, led by the brilliant Admiral Tōgō Heihachirō, was rested, they were drilled to perfection, and they were fighting in their own backyard. And, crucially, they had a decisive edge in almost everything that mattered: technology, tactics, and leadership.
A huge part of Japan's victory came down to this one elegant and absolutely devastating maneuver known as crossing the T. Okay, so picture this. As the Russian fleet steams forward in a long line, Admiral Tōgō suddenly turns his fleet across their path, forming the top of the letter T. This allowed every single one of his ships to fire all their main guns, their full broadside, at the lead Russian ships. The Russians, meanwhile, are stuck. They can only shoot back with the few guns they have pointing forward. It's like a firing squad versus one guy with a pistol. The concentration of firepowers was just overwhelming.
But it wasn't just tactics. I mean, look at this comparison. The Japanese had advantages right across the board. Their commanders were battle-hardened. Their gunnery was way more accurate thanks to better fire control systems. And their shells, oh man, their shells were a secret weapon. They were packed with an explosive called shimos, and they were designed to explode on impact, starting massive fires and just shredding the tops of the Russian ships. On top of all that, they had wireless telegraphy, basically an early form of radio, which they used perfectly to track the Russians long before they ever saw them. The Russians were slower, less accurate, less experienced. They were outclassed in just about every single way.
And as the two fleets finally closed in on each other, Admiral Tōgō had a signal flag hoisted on his flagship.
the message became legendary in Japan. It was clear, simple, and powerful. The empire's fate depends on the result of this battle. Let every man do his utmost duty. His fleet went into this fight with an absolute iron will to win.
Now, let's flip the perspective. What did it feel like to be on the receiving end of that? This is from a Russian officer, Captain Vladimir Semenov. He described the Japanese firestorm like this. Shells seemed to be pouring upon us incessantly. Iron ladders were crumpled up into rings. Guns were literally hurled from their mountings. It was a vision of pure hell, created by that superior Japanese gunnery.
The result, of course, was a complete massacre. Over the next day and night, the Japanese Navy systematically hunted down and destroyed what was left of the scattered Russian fleet. The final tally for the Russians? 11. 11 battleships sunk or captured.
And the Japanese, how many battleships did they lose? 0. Not a single one. The sheer totality of this victory is almost hard to comprehend. It was so decisive, it forced Russia to sue for peace, ending the war. But the battle's real impact was only just getting started.
Because the ripples from Tsushima would spread far, far beyond Japan and Russia. Naval planners and admirals all over the world started studying this battle obsessively, desperate to figure out the lessons that had just been written in fire and steel in the Sea of Japan.
And one of the clearest lessons came from a British Royal Navy observer who was actually on board a Japanese battleship during the fight. He wrote that what this battle proved, above all else, was the vast importance of carrying some of the heaviest and furthest shooting guns. In other words, in the chaos of a modern naval battle, the only thing that really mattered was big guns with long range. Everything else was secondary. The age of mixing different-sized guns on warships was over.
And this single idea set off an incredible chain reaction, like a set of global dominoes. First, Tsushima proves that the future belongs to all big gun ships. Second, Britain, taking this lesson to heart, immediately designs and launches HMS Dreadnought in 1906, a ship so revolutionary, so powerful, it instantly makes every other battleship in the world obsolete. And third, the moment Dreadnought appears, it kicks the naval arms race between Britain and Germany into hyperdrive, a race that becomes a major factor leading straight to World War I.
And the political consequences were just as huge. I mean, think about it. For the first time in the modern era, an Asian nation had crushed a European power in a major war. This shattered the global myth of automatic European military superiority. It announced Japan's arrival as a world power. And back in Russia, the humiliation of this defeat was one of the key sparks that fueled the unrest that would eventually bring down the Tsar and the entire Romanov dynasty. So the Battle of Tsushima was so much more than just a naval victory. It was a technological earthquake that redesigned the world's navies, and a political shockwave that redrew the global balance of power. It really forces us to ask a pretty heavy question. How much did this one brutal battle, back in the spring of 1905, help set the entire world on the path to an even bigger, even more terrible conflict just 1 decade later?